So, how would you define People Before Kink? Is that an idea or a philosophy or a method or an operating system or a moral principle? What is it?
People Before Kink is a philosophy. The philosophy is you are who you are before what you are or what you're into or what you do. It stems from my journey in the earlier years where a lot of the kink was transactional and it felt really empty. So what I did is I started hosting events. And I started hosting the events with the intentions of having things present that weren't present at other events, like me meeting everyone that walks through the door, so that at least they have someone they can put a name to in a new space of vulnerability that they may not be comfortable with. And with that, what I learned is the more you hold space for folks, essentially just giving them your undivided attention without judgment, you learn a lot about people. And when you learn how much more we have in common, it prioritizes the person as an identity, as a human being, before being a kink dispenser or a kink receiver. And that's what was missing when I was coming out to events was I'm a person before I'm a dominant. I'm a person before I'm a submissive. It's like, I don't want to meet you based on your labels. And there's others like myself who didn't want that either. So the philosophy came from wanting to create a community and tribe that wasn't existing when I was looking for it.
What did exist, and what was the atmosphere between people at events or in any circle where they met through kink circumstances when you first entered?
Well, when I first started coming out, there was a few groups that were hosting events, and the community was very segregated back then. And by segregated, I mean you have the gay community, the queer community, and the hetero community. But you also had it divided by race, believe it or not. There was a Spanish group, there was a black African American group, and then there was the white groups. And that's something that actually doesn't get discussed often, is the segregation within the community. I mean, it is now, but back then that was the standard. And it didn't fit right with me because I had enough identity issues growing up as a Latino who's Puerto Rican and Mexican, who looks white, and as people refer to me as white passing. I didn't have a community because I'm not white, so sure as hell I wasn't being received by the white folks, and I'm not dark enough to be received by my own folks, so I never had a home. Now imagine me going onto my journey of sexual identity and not having a home there. Too gay for the straights, too straight for the gays. I can't fit into my Latino people because I'm not treated as such. I can't go to the white groups because I'm Latino. And the black African American groups, that's where I hit home, right? That's where I settled. I also grew up in East Harlem. But to be received culturally was difficult too. So what do? I had to create what was missing for people like myself who don't have a place we can call home because community at large just wasn't accepting us.
You're speaking about the kink community. Can you tell me what the kink community looked like and what did PBK come to correct in the kink community?
So across all the spectrums, it was all kink based, right? Checklist based. What are you into? Are you into this? I'm into that, and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, it prioritized play over connection. And someone who suffered from sex addiction and impulsivity, someone who's trying to overcome that and find their own value, that wasn't a good fit for me. It wasn't a good fit in what I was trying to do and change within my life. So I wanted to be the change I needed to see. So I started hosting the events. What was missing is respect and value, humanity, right? People, like, you're not an object. That's what was missing.
Can you give me an example for an interaction like that in which somebody is objectified because...
Oh, 100%. So what does that look like? What does it look like to be objectified or fetishized in this community? So as a dominant, right, and I've been doing this stuff for a minute, so flogging comes natural. I'm pretty good at it. And what would happen was people would come up and say, "Ooh, Master Joshua, me next, me next." And I'm like, dude, I don't even know your name. It's like, people don't realize the energy output that happens, like the investment of time and energy, just gaining up, learning this much about myself, learning this much about the skill. It's like, it's a craft, it's an investment. And to be boiled down to a kink dispenser of people just asking, "Ooh, can you flog me?" without me even knowing their name, that's what that looked like.
How did PBK address these issues?
So, People Before Kink requires people to actually have conversations, right? I learned this trick from one of my partners, Kat now, who hosted a swing club called Decadence a few years ago, where she would keep the space closed and require people to socialize for that first 45 minutes. And I thought that was genius, right? Because how do you take People Before Kink as a philosophy and integrate it into events? By making people stand around and talk. And once people started to stand around and talk, they started to realize they have so much more in common that's beyond kink and fetish. And that's how we were able to bring it into fruition, into real time on an event level. We also have a retreat that's based on introspection. And all of this introspection is created off of professional domination, which this lifestyle was thankful to deliver into my lap, where I was able to understand what conversations need to be had in order for us to get to know each other. For us to be able to be vulnerable and for you to share things with me, we have to talk, right? Not show up with checklists.
Just to clarify, what do you refer to in the term introspection? What does that mean?
Introspection is asking yourself questions about your identity or your position on beliefs and purpose, if you've discovered it, or at least clawing your way to it, so that you can have an understanding of what's important for you.
Got it. So what are the components of People Before Kink? What do you teach in the workshops, but also in everyday life? How do you carry it out? What's the pieces of it?
The pieces about the pieces that make People Before Kink what it is vulnerability and integrity, right? To the best that we can do. Understanding that we're all human beings and that no one ever taught us how to do this, most of us at least. It's not an easy feat, right? When I discovered my ability to do it successfully with one person, then two people, then three people, it's like, what's the formula in action here? And it's the ability to, the desire, because that's something you have to learn as well. It's not something you just have. The ability to be present and mindful, to listen to what a person's saying, and to be as vulnerable as you can responsibly and safely. Because what I have to do is I have to show my cards first every time in order to set the pace for what a connection is going to look like. I can't come to a person with expectation of vulnerability if I'm not willing to do it myself.
Can you give me an example, a concrete example, a story that happened to a relationship or a dynamic or an interaction that changed through the application of that specific set of ideas?
Oh, every relationship I have. There's one in particular with, I have quite a few stories. There was a gentleman who was in an abusive relationship for 28 years. And when he divorced, when he finally got out of that relationship, he had identified as a gay male. He was married to a woman. He pursued his journey, but with a lot of negative energy and negative emotion, with no trust for anyone, because he had just been abused in the safest space he could think about for 28 years. So when we met, with the journey that I asked people to take, the questions that I asked them to answer for me, I have to answer for them too, right? I have to set the pace for, this is the type of vulnerability I'm looking to share with you. And we chipped away at the block. By the time we were able to connect in person and have our session, have our scene, it was like a religious experience almost, right? To have this man who I came bearing my chest, all my cards, so that he can so that he can heal, he can say, I see you, and take the step into vulnerability. That's one that it looks like.
When does this most come into play? Or where is it most impactful, let's say? Is it something that you want to do systematically when you meet a new person, for example, or when you're dating, or when you're in a party, or throughout a relationship? When exactly is the key moment when you say, this is the principle I need to apply right now?
All the time. All the time. It's like the fight with integrity, right? The not just not lying, but omission or fear or shame, right? That keeps a person from saying everything, right? These are practices that I try to keep as mindful about as much as possible, because ultimately it boils down to speaking my mind as kindly as I possibly can. Now, I'm a human being, and that doesn't work all the time. But understanding that the principles are, do the best that you can as a human being to be a good human. That's what People Before Kink is, essentially a philosophy to be a good human being. It sounds like it's kink related, but it has nothing to do with kink. It has everything to do with human connection, right? And being able to say, great job, or I fucked up.
Mm-hmm. Can you break down the principles of the system to what experiences, insights, or situations were they derived from? And how should people act according to them?
Reframe that question.
Give me bullet points. What are the principles of this system?
The principles of People Before Kink. There's a ton, right? It's transparency, right? Try to be as open and honest as you possibly can. Integrity, try to be as truthful as you can all the time. Don't be a dick, right? Be a kind person as much as you can. It all boils down to traits of being a good person, right? It's not the wheel reinvented. It's just trying to find, how do we find the people who allow us to feel safe, seen, and heard through transparency. People filter themselves out.
It's a high bar to live up to.
It's not an impossible bar, because it isn't to say do it 100%. It's to say give it your best shot.
What do you hope to change through People Before Kink, and how would you achieve that?
Well, my secret is I want to save humanity with it, right? Through sex and kink and fetish, because it's fun. And in that disguise of sex and fetish and leather and BDSM, I'm hoping to slide in understanding your character and how to be a good human. Because if you access being a good human, you can have the most incredible sex in your life. But you have to be a good human. You have to practice that outwardly. You have to be the change you want to see. And I joke around about the sex. The sex is the byproduct of the connections, right? They're all byproducts. The connection is what you carry with you. So I want to trick humans into being kind people for the sake of great sex.